Hello, this is Eric Wade, MLTI Ambassador, and this PD is all about engaging students through the iterative process. The iterative process is also sometimes known as design thinking or the engineering process. Um, I like iterative. I think it kind of speaks a little bit more to the actual process itself. But if you're in the middle of googling something and you're like, oh, I want to know more about this, you're not going to find a lot in terms of iterative processes when it comes to education on the internet. But you will find lots and lots of it on design thinking, and then kind of connect those two together. So anyway, one of the things that I feel is really really important about school is that students have the ability to make mistakes and fail at things like in a safe place, not like to fail a whole class, but I mean like do something and not be successful and persevere through that unsuccessfulness, through that failure to become stronger people. I feel that sometimes education kind of skips over this piece, and I don't feel like we're doing our students a service by skipping this. So, one of my favorite quotes actually, and that I use when talking to other teachers and to parents is, "I've learned more from my mistakes than my successes," which is absolutely true. And I feel like one of the things that schools can do a better job of is allowing students the opportunity to not be successful the first time through, and that to have to persevere and to have to be able to go through and keep trying something until they get it right. So what the iterative process does is it gives students a chance to do that in a safe place. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the iterative process real quick, and then we're going to look at the steps of the iterative process, kind of how they work and what those pieces mean, and then how do you integrate that into your classroom and getting started with it, like ways to get moving with this. So let's start with the iterative process, right? So again, like I said, similar to design thinking, right? It focuses student learning on designing, creating, testing, revising a product or creation. All right, it's very versatile. Use it at any point. You can have it. I've used it for assessments in in some cases, some problem-based learning. I use it for the assessment at the very end. I've used it as a kind of an engagement piece to get everybody started in different formats. There's really no bad place to put this iterative process in. It can be anywhere. It's great because the purpose of it is to engage students, right? So where it fits, where it fits naturally is a fantastic place to put it in there. So again, it's a great place for project-based learning, inquiry-based learning. It's very cross-curricular. In fact, it's almost mandatory that it is cross-curricular in a lot of ways because you are hitting a lot of different content at the same time. It gives students a safe place to fail. And I'm going to keep coming back to this idea of a student's a safe place to fail, because that last piece of that with support is the most important part. Um, Students are constantly using the iterative process. They're always doing it at home or with their friends or outside or doing sports or whatever, playing games, learning an instrument. It doesn't matter. They're always doing this iterative process, which we'll get to that steps in a minute. But they're constantly doing that. When they fail at something in their real lives and they don't have the support to help pick them back up to learn their lesson and to move on to persevere through that so they can get to continue to do that, then that's a struggle, right? Students aren't successful that way. But in a classroom, we have the ability to give them support, to give them encouragement, to help them when they're down, to help them problem solve the next steps of different things, whatever the next step is. That's why I'm going to keep coming back to this idea of students have a safe place to fail, because we're as teachers there to support them when they do and help them to learn the skills to be able to be successful after they've tried again and again and again. And as far as like 21st century skills go, this is a fantastic opportunity to integrate the 4 C's, which if you're not familiar with the 4 C's, I have a PD about the 4 C's on the YouTube channel. In fact, I don't have it right now, but I'm going to link this right here, that where it says 4 C's. I'm going to link that, and if you click that, it'll take you right to the PD on the 4 C's. But the 4 C's, if you're unfamiliar with them: collaboration, communication, creativity, and critical thinking. Kind of 4 skills that are integral for any student leaving school and going into the workplace at some point in their lives. So let's take a look at the steps of the iterative process, which is our next ones. So I'm going to start actually with talking about inquiry. So this infographic here is one of my favorite kind of descriptions of inquiry, because inquiry is not something that you just start and just give students the ability to do this. And again, I have a PD on inquiry, which I didn't do that one either. So I'll make sure that I link the PD on inquiry to this as well if you're unfamiliar with how inquiry works. But basically, the idea here is that you wouldn't want to start students in a structured inquiry and get deeper into inquiry itself as you went through, right? So you wouldn't start by throwing kids in the deep end and being like, just do whatever you want, right? Iteration is very, very similar to that. Just like I said before, students have experience using iteration. Everything in their lives is based on iteration in some way, but they're not used to doing it in school, and that's the difference. That if they haven't been doing this all along K-12, then just to throw them into this idea of iteration is incredibly frustrating. So similar to the way that the pool is set up here with the structured, controlled, guided, and free, and shallow to deep, I think it's important to think about iteration in a similar way. So you got to start off at the very beginning with some sort of structured iteration, right? You might be working on a project as a group, and then or as a whole class, and then building that autonomy into that iteration. If you just start with iteration at the end, and you have to trust me, I have absolutely experienced this where students have had no experience in a classroom working with iteration or the iterative process in any way, and we just start and they're unsuccessful and they're frustrated and there's never an opportunity to grow from the failure. So it is important that you start off kind of in the beginning here. Not that you have to start at the very, very, very shallow end. You can start kind of here in the middle. But it is important that we start with a little more control and a little more guided versions of iteration, and then get to the point where it's a little more free. And lastly, scaffolding. Just like in inquiry, scaffolding is so important when it comes to iterating things. When you do and using iteration in your classroom, it is having that scaffolding so that so students can feel safe to move on to the next step is so important. So let's look at the iterative process. Okay, so I want you to first notice that this is a loop because it's designed that way. If you're familiar with design thinking, if you're familiar with like the engineering process, you'll know that it's basically a loop. You're going to keep going until you're done and everything was successful. So start with learning and any requirements that are necessary for whatever it is you're going to be doing. Okay, that's the first step. It's always the first step. Look at your requirements and learn whatever background information you might need. Now that might be pulled from another class. It could be that you're looking at angles of things and that's part of what's going to happen here, so you need to have that background from math class to be able to understand that. It could be that it's something that you're learning in class that you're then applying to a new project, to something like that, and you're going to be iterative about that project. It doesn't really make any difference, but that first step is of course one of the most important. Is you got to know your background information, and the students need to understand what your requirements are of the assignment. So once everybody's good with that, the next step is design. So then you're going to design your whatever, your kind of, if it's one of the examples that I love is in my science class, we do Newton scooters, which is the assessment at the end of Newton's third law. And the first thing they have to do, but basically the idea is you're building a car from recycled pieces that moves only using Newton's third law of motion, usually a balloon. Students always have to build their designs first. They have to draw out their design to give me an idea of what it is that they're thinking. Will that design be the final product? Never. No, I don't think ever once has the initial design been the final product. But once you've got the design done and I always made students, I had approved it first to make sure that, and had explained it to me to make sure that they knew what they were doing. Then they get to the creation part, right? So then they start building whatever it is that they just designed. And this is when, and I wish I had put a circle back here, because this is where I find that this tends to be circular, that they start creating, realize that their idea that they had in their design isn't going to work. So they got to go back to their design piece and redesign whatever it was that they're doing, and then go back to creation and then keep moving in this loop for a little while. And once they're good, once they've redesigned and they've got their creation done and they're like, all right, I'm ready to go, then they test it out. And the testing, may go well. It may not. Who knows, right? It's hard to say. But the testing is the kind of the next piece of it. Check it out and see if it works. And then you evaluate and review. So if it was a success, fantastic. What do you got to do left? What's the next piece of this? What do you have to do to finish this off? If it wasn't a success, then it's time to start again. And maybe you can skip the learning requirements piece because you might be good to go, or you might need to do a little bit more research and then redesign, then create, then redesign, then create, then test, then evaluate and review. And you just keep going around in this circle, right? Until everything is good or you run out of time, which happens sometimes as well. So that's the process. This is the steps that you would use if you were doing iteration. And like I said, they're very similar to the steps of an engineer would use. They're very similar to the steps of design thinking. So, but this is the basic idea. So let's talk about how to actually use this, right? Let's look at some ways that you can integrate this. So in the STEM world, like I said before, physics-wise, Newton scooters are a fantastic example of this, but there are lots and lots and lots of other ones. And one of the things too that I wanted to kind of mention here is these can absolutely be authentic problems, right? These can be 100% authentic. How is it, if you have, let's say you have an ice rink at your school, right? And you want students to be able to put their skates on in the where it's warm. And then have them, because it's a really cold day, you want them to be outside for 20 minutes skating, but you want them to be able to put their skates on where it's warm. That's an iterative process to get you to the point of how do you get from point A to point B with skates on, right? And it's a really simple, authentic issue. It's very much, could very much be a problem. But with the physics piece, you can absolutely work physics ideas into solving real life problems. The same with biology, right? Like if, a water filter is a perfect example of something that can be iterative. And it has real life implications. Using water, clean water is a big problem around the world. How can we design an easy to use water filter that anybody could use just using the stuff they have in their backyard? Geometry concepts, absolutely important. Angles per area, perimeter, right, are such important pieces to almost every other iterative process you would work. And this could be background knowledge. This could be learning something that has to be learned before you can apply that understanding to another part in science or whatever it might be. For chemistry, aquaponics is a really cool program if you've never done it before. It's the idea of growing plants using fish and kind of a closed system between the fish, but there's a lot of chemistry that's involved there. An aquaponics setup absolutely has iteration in it, especially if you're not using a pre-designed setup, you're going to design it yourself. There's going to be a lot of iteration there. Looking at data, collecting data to decide, after you've tested, to collect that data and make sure that it's doing what you want it to do. Might be just time, might be distance, who knows? Could be anything. With the Newton scooters, it's distance. That's the data that they're collecting. So knowing how to collect that data and how to use that data, which is the algebra piece, right? How do you create an algorithm in a spreadsheet that will help you to interpret your data? You collected it, now what? What are you going to do with it? So using those algebra concepts as far as, using a spreadsheet, right, to be able to write your own algorithm is super important to be able to do. And a great way to integrate across the curriculum as part of the iterative process. Maybe not be like a kind of a specific step in that process, but a subtle kind of a behind the scenes piece that students need to be able to do the rest of the project. From a humanities perspective, you cannot, at this point in the process, you wouldn't be able to ignore the writing piece that goes into this. My students, when we do iteration and we do iterative projects, are constantly writing. They're reflecting. They're talking about next steps. They're describing what happened. They're describing what didn't happen and what should have happened. They're constantly writing. And also the literacy piece, because a student may get to the point where they're kind of reevaluating what happened and trying to decide what's next. And that requires them to do a little bit more research, which is where that literacy can come in. For geography, kind of moving in the social studies realm, students looking at man-made structures and how can they be improved. Biomimicry is a fantastic way to kind of include some science into a social studies class. Looking at Velcro, for instance, and how that was based on the little needles of a burdock plant, burdock, whatever they're called, a burdock. I always call them burdocks. but that's absolutely, biomimicry is a huge piece of science that people tend to ignore. But it is really, really incredible and a fantastic way to kind of get some iteration into social studies. Civics. We did a project once where about plastic bags, and the iterative process that we used was, you need to be able to present to the House committee on environmental committee at the state level on the dangers of plastic bags, to the environment and such. So we absolutely did an iterative process around writing, right? Because it was try it, design it, right, test it, uh, try it out, see if it works, take that, decide if you want to go forward or not. It's same with speaking and listening, right? To be able to speak in front of people, it is a very much a trial, kind of learn by doing type of project. It's such an important piece of this that is absolutely iterative. Applying historical lessons to current iterative projects. Understanding back to that literacy piece. Being able to go back in time and see what worked, what didn't work, what's existing now, what other people have tried, that might fit into might help you kind of design a little differently going as you kind of get started on this. And then literacy, again, one of my favorites, and this is iterative in a lot of ways because writing very much is iterative. I would argue writing stories, writing anything really, as far as a piece of fiction or nonfiction, is absolutely iterative. So one of my favorite little projects to do is we take a sci-fi book that we've read in class and change the ending or do an alternate ending, and then kind of use the iterative process to do that writing, especially around like hooks to get kids interested in whatever you're going to be reading. So I would argue writing is iterative, but I'm sure people would push back on me a little bit on that. So let's look at how we get started on this. First thing is you have to start off with a different mindset when it comes to looking at your standards. It's easy to look at a standard and be like, students will be able to distribute across a parenthesis, right? But is there a way to then include that into something that's bigger, a bigger project that you might not, that knowledge might be important to be able to use the iterative process to solve? I don't know. That's the idea, right? Is that you want to look at your standards a little differently instead of looking at them as students need to be able to do this on a test, which I know is the way that a lot of folks think about the world. Is instead to think about how can they apply this and do something with it, right? So some standards fit fantastic into the iterative process. Others don't. Others just don't fit. It's not really worth the time to try and cram that circular standard into the square hole that is your whatever it is that you're doing. So it's not worth the time, right? You have better things to do. And along with that idea of standards is to think across the curriculum, right? This is a fantastic opportunity to do cross-curricular work, to work maybe as a team of teachers or however your school's set up, and to think about the standard that you're teaching is a piece of another standard as well, or can be integrated into another standard that another teacher might be doing. It's a fantastic way to think across the curriculum. And studies are showing that working across the curriculum, giving context to standards, is incredibly helpful for students to understand. And it gets past that, like, what am I going to do with this argument that students have from time to time. Don't recreate the wheel. Start small. Those are absolutely two very, very important pieces here. If you can find a project that somebody else has already done and you can adjust it, tweak it to make it your own, do it, right? Like, we're teachers. We're constantly borrowing things from other people and tweaking them to make them what we want them to be. And start small, right? Start, like, back to the inquiry idea. Like, maybe your first project is a group project with the whole classroom, where you're the facilitator, you're the leader, and you're helping kids walk through this idea of how to think in this way. But start small, because you don't want to start with a huge project and feel failure about it and not have anybody there to support you. Just like because you're likely never do it again. So start small. It's my biggest piece of advice from somebody who does this kind of work in my classroom all the time. Start small. It's a very important step. And that's it. So thank you so much for paying attention to this. Uh, if you feel that you want to, if you need to email me to ask me more questions about this or to kind of whatever question you have, please email me. I'll come to your school, I'll drive to you, and we can sit down together and talk about a project if you have an idea for a project, or just a deeper understanding of the iterative process, like maybe some examples. Happy to do that. Please just get in touch. You follow me on Twitter if you so desire. And if you click here, it'll take you to a quick little quiz in Microsoft Forms. And then when you finish that quiz, which is 2 questions and it's very, very simple, it'll give you a link to this certificate right here. All you have to do is put your name here at the top, hit submit and print, and it will automatically print you off a half a contact hour for your time. So thank you so much again for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.